Thank you all for being here and for the opportunity to give this speech today. As we have all maybe painfully noticed in the past 2 years, the welfare sector across Europe is facing increasing demands and shrinking resources. That's what the media have been telling us. We hear calls for greater efficiency, and as a response, policymakers and public administrations suggest to make resources free through data-driven welfare provision. There is this kind of vision that welfare can be radically transformed by automation, by enhancement with artificial intelligence. So what I want to do in my talk is to unfold the multi-layered implications of the digital transformation of public welfare. Automated decision-making or decision support systems are based on data-driven insights using personal data about individual citizens, and in order to optimize task performance, specific tasks in welfare provision are delegated to algorithmic systems. Emerging ADM systems perform many different functions in society. Some of them are mundane and they're perceived as relatively unproblematic, even beneficial for citizens, but others sure do have the capacity to disrupt and change living circumstances. ADM in welfare administration has been underway in areas such as welfare fraud detection, as you might have heard from the cases in the Netherlands, in Denmark, in the UK. Another area is children's welfare. Then we have life event management in Finland, and we have core social services such as employment services, healthcare, social benefits provision. If you happen to see the logo of your national or communal employment agency on this slide, it means that your agency has been or is using algorithmic assistance for decisions regarding its services. One of them here on the top left is the Austrian Public Employment Agency, and I will start with the case of this agency's system for the profiling of job seekers. I will then widen the scope to the automation of welfare across Europe in general, and to how the future of welfare is figured, to then conclude on how I think technology assessment can get to the core question of how power is reconfigured within the emergent infrastructures of welfare. Like a number of other European countries, Austria, as I said, is trying to introduce a decision support system that predicts the employment prospects of job seekers. In German, this system is referred to as Arbeitsmarktchancenassistenzsystem, AMAS short, but the system has become publicly known as the so-called IMS algorithm, even though it is not one algorithm per se, but it is really 93 models that come together here in structuring the data of unemployed people. The system is not in use yet. The Austrian Data Protection Agency has made a complaint that there is no legal basis for such a system to be introduced, and that even though it is supposed to be only semi-automated, only a decision support system, that it will likely have similar effects as an automated system. So right now, the decision whether it can be introduced lies with the Supreme Administrative Court in Austria. As you can imagine from this little snippet on the slide here, when the public first learned about the system, it was heavily criticized for discriminating against women. You can see a deduction for female unemployed people. It was criticized for discriminating against mothers in particular, since care obligations are automatically assumed from social security data of mothers, but not of fathers. And it has also been criticized for being biased against other protected groups. Based on past statistics, job seekers are classified into groups to which then different resources are allocated. So AMAS looks for connections between the characteristics of job seekers and successful employment. The overall trajectory of this project is to invest primarily in those job seekers for whom the support measures will most likely lead to a fast and also to a sustainable reintegration into the labor market. So I guess this sounds sort of like a legitimate aim at first. But let's see in a little bit more detail what the IMS algorithm actually does. So it classifies job seekers into 3 categories, as I've mentioned. There is the group H with high chances to find a job within the next 6 months. This group can use the agency's services, but it is expected to find work without additional training or job qualification. Group M with mediocre prospects is offered job trainings and qualification measures to support them, and Group L is the group with low chances of employment within the next 2 years, and these clients get guidance but not real job trainings. This decision is based on the assumption that they have other needs first and that they could not really gain from qualification measures. The design of the profiling system was guided by 3 objectives. First of all, to increase the efficiency of the counseling process. That means the time and the resources used by the caseworkers should be more targeted, and they try to target that better by differentiating the customers into these 3 groups. Second, to increase the effectiveness of labor market programs and the use of funds in order to meet the government's or the federal government's labor market policy goals. Resources for qualifying measures and job trainings should only be used in the middle segment. And third, the system is supposed to standardize the granting of active labor market measures to avoid arbitrary awarding of support through evidence-based decision-making. However, as we saw, this is not reflected in the system's design in terms of fairness metrics or adequate performance measures. The political goal behind the system is the use of funding instruments should become more effective, in particular through savings on job seekers with high chances, through a focus on those with medium chances, and through outsourcing all customers with low chances. So, as you might imagine, a closer look at the system reveals what is actually widely known in critical data studies. Like similar system, this system AMAS reproduces pre-existing bias. It integrates cumulative disadvantage of groups that are historically marginalized on the labor market and that therefore also in this system get lower scores. It also uses problematic proxy variables. For example, it includes the client's level of education, something that we would probably expect, but then it also includes the local unemployment situation of the client's location of living. So is it a problematic or troubled area that you live in? And this is a proxy for social class. Now, if you think of Vienna, this doesn't seem plausible at all because you could have 2 districts next to each other and one might be labeled as problematic and the other one not, but you could still travel those 10 minutes to find a job in the other district. So this really doesn't say anything about your chances on the regional labor market. Moreover, then, precision rates differ between groups, errors are not distributed equally, and this clearly disadvantages people for who limited data are available, for example, people who migrated. So the Public Employment Agency itself describes the computer value as a sort of second opinion to assist caseworkers. However, we can see that the focus of client contact will clearly shift from the personal support needs of an individual to labor market opportunities based on a population calculation. This changes the work practice of counselors towards handling a series of tasks required by the system. Explaining or negotiating, for example, a client's classification or a possible reclassification requires much more time and also commitment of the caseworker than simply accepting the calculated value. And given the short counseling time per job seeker, it is very likely that caseworkers will just routinely treat the computer value as the first opinion instead. This is likely to undermine or overrule even their own experience and counseling. To distract public concerns, the job agency claims the system is neutral, it is objective, and it is of high quality, but at the same time, it emphasizes the idea of the second opinion over and over again, and it describes the role of the caseworker to act as a social corrective. So if the system makes mistakes, there is still a human in the loop who can correct what is happening there. So to all of you who maybe appreciate the idea of modernization of public administrations, have a look at this interface. This is what it really looks like. I think it has a sort of an ironic 80s vibe, and it is not what you might expect when you hear about modernization of the public sector. What you can see here on this slide on top is the computer-generated value, which gives this person an N rating for niedrig in German, for low chances. And you have the integration chances on the other side with the percentages of how fast they could get a job or how sustainable they could get a job. And then if the caseworker would like to make changes, they have to enter a reason which this is a very standardized procedure. You have to go through lists to see what exactly your reasoning can be to change the rating of a client. For job seekers, the focus on the classification means that their own biography, that their skills are reduced to a seemingly objective value that supposedly provides information about their chances on the labor market. The choice of variables focus on personal characteristics of the job seeker, and in this way, unemployment is framed in terms of employability of individualized job seekers. Individualized job seekers who also do have a limited agency to influence their score. Since the variables strongly focus on person characteristics, the system basically essentializes their employability, and this, of course, carries a danger of the stigmatization of different groups. So we find a clearly value-laden selection of variables, categories, thresholds, and performance indicators in the system. For example, when it comes to thresholds, when we look at age categories, two people at the ages of 30 and 49 are supposed to have more similar integration chances than two people with 29 and 30 years old. So there is a very hard threshold here. When we look at standardization practices, we can see that variables can be rather fuzzy. For example, there is this variable health impairment, and the answer is yes or no, without consideration of does this impact your professional life, in what sector, so does that have any impact on your employability at all? Or occupational group, here we have only 2 sectors, production and service, which then means that a programmer would fall into the same category as a waiter, for example, and it is assumed that they have similar integration chances. Then we can also see that some soft aspects have been excluded from the system, for example, motivation or appearance, all of which are important factors in finding a job and that are not reflected in the system. All in all, the system does not indicate at all if a job seeker's low chances are due to the economic situation, due to discrimination on the labor market, or due to shortcomings of the client, him or herself. There are some little explanation texts that the caseworker can see and also read to the client, but these explanation texts merely refer to the clients, and this is so to the personal characteristics of the clients again, not to the economy or whatever might have a big impact there. So this is a clear contradiction between what the agency claims that the system takes into account and what the developers have implemented. So for both caseworkers and clients, the inscribed biases are absolutely not transparent. Much can be said, of course, about the needs for transparency, for independent oversight, for democratic discourse, or the legal implications of such a system. But let's first see if AMAS even meets the organizational goals of the Public Employment Agency. An increase in the efficiency of the consulting process, as I explained earlier, can very likely only be reached with a predominantly routine adoption of the computer-generated classification. This indeed counteracts the service orientation of an institution that fulfills its public mandate to increase the chances of job seekers. Second, increasing the training effectiveness by concentrating the funding in the middle segment does actually not aim at the accuracy and quality of an active labor market measure for a particular client. On the contrary, it combines the goal of the effective use of resources with a very coarse division into these 3 customer groups. And third, the third goal is standardization to reduce arbitrariness. In the development of the IMS algorithm, hardly any procedures were used to avoid bias, and the system does not offer any assistance with preventing possible structural unequal treatment. And I want to emphasize that traditionally, equal treatment policies play a big role in the job agency's practices, and there is a big risk that this practice will be overruled by an objectified classification of job seekers. So much to the flaws of this system. No one can do anything by themselves. This is my current favorite movie quote, and so these are the people that I was very lucky to work with. On this case, it was an interdisciplinary group from the TU Wien and from ITA, and we had a great advisory board consisting of a computer scientist, a professor in public law, and a professor in sociology. That was also very helpful to have them to discuss the case from different perspectives, even more than we could bring in terms of disciplinary approaches. Okay, now the IMS algorithm might sort of seem like a very peculiar, like national case. but many others are known, from the Dutch Siri case that was ruled unlawful to the Polish job seekers profiling system that was brought down by subversive practices of caseworkers. And from here on, it is that the futures of welfare across Europe are being shaped. In 2021, the European Commission has presented a proposal for a decision on a path to the digital decade. And it sets out concrete digital targets, including the digitization of public services. The EU envisions a joint effort by all member states and also at the union level, a novel governance system even to reach that goal, also including joined-up investments. The 2030 Digital Compass states, and I quote, that Europe must harness digitalization to drive a paradigm change in how citizens, public administrations, and democratic institutions interact, ensuring interoperability across all levels of government and across public services, which also means sharing of data, of course. Now, my question for this talk is, how can we conceptualize and analytically grasp this change in governance or this change, this paradigm change? What is this kind of infrastructure that is being envisioned there, and how do we foreground the socio-material practices that it emerges with, or the social fabric that it is built from, and the social relations that it brings about. Now, if we think of infrastructure, we might think of the power grid, we might think of wires, we might think of hardware in some sort of way. But SDS approaches to infrastructure propose a more relational concept of infrastructure. Infrastructure is a contextual relation rather than the thing. So analytically, this also shifts our perspective from looking at the systems to looking at the relations these systems bring forward. The notion of infrastructuring, of doing infrastructure, emphasizes that infrastructure relates to the people who design it, who maintain it, and who use it. Infrastructure is embedded, it is sunk inside of other structures, social arrangements, and technologies. And clearly, a number of significant political, ethical, and social choices are folded into its development. Now, using the earlier example, the infrastructure as a contextual relation shows in the way in which social arrangements, structures, and technologies are entangled, and in the multi-layeredness of this entanglement. So we have the system, the algorithm itself, the guiding principles that informed its technical design, the technical implementation of the organizational practices that pre-existed the system, the data it is based on, the error rates, the results for different groups of people. But then we also have the counseling process, the objectives that the system pursues on an operational level, the effects it has on the interaction between caseworkers and job seekers, the impact it finally has on individual job seekers. The third layer refers to the agency as a whole. What objectives does a system like AMAS pursue on an organizational level? What organizational culture and practices does it imply, and how are these then also being transformed? So for example, how is adopting the computer score linked to the supervision of caseworkers themselves and to the agency's performance indicators? And then, obviously, this is a system that is to support the government's labor market policies, as I've noted. So what is the relation between the profiling and labor market policies, but also maybe even more encompassing how is automated decision-making in the public sector co-produced with the transformation of welfare, how is the relationship between citizens and the states reconfigured with these emerging welfare infrastructures. Looking at the system from this perspective then shows that the supposedly increased effectivity legitimizes a particular distribution of scarce resources. So only Group M has access to traditional active labor market programs. Group L is provided with less costly measures, and there is a systematic inequality of treatment inscribed to the system. Other countries, I want to emphasize, have taken different decisions here. For instance, Sweden provides privileged support for job seekers with a high risk of long-term unemployment, so more support for the lower group. Welfare systems across Europe have been changing in the past 20 years, and we have to have a close look, in fact, at emergent welfare infrastructures in light of these neoliberal shifts in social systems. From studies on active labor market policies, we know that there has been a transformation from the welfare state toward what they call the workfare state, for example, in Germany and Austria, where in order to receive welfare or to receive support, you have to constantly prove your employability, to have to prove your willingness to work. However, then, if employability becomes a person characteristic, how do activation policies change, we might ask? Okay, so far I have shown that the notion of welfare infrastructures suggests that ADM systems are closely entangled with the transformation of administrative practices and also of the relationship between citizens and the state. But what can this conceptualization of welfare infrastructures do for an assessment of the automation in welfare? Scoring and other forms of algorithmic decision-making are increasingly woven into the social safety net of Europe, and this affects social and economic rights and concerns, we could say, the very fabric of welfare infrastructures. So I suggest that two aspects are particularly important, namely how are power relations reconfigured through these transformations, and what does that mean for the role of technology assessment in the years to come. The introduction of ADM systems, as you might know, is very often motivated with quantitative measures, with efficiency, resource savings, with promises of fairness and equal treatment. So this assumes that bias and noise will be minimized or even eliminated altogether then by reducing human intervention in the decision-making process. The study of knowledge infrastructures has a long tradition of questioning power relations. And the power of infrastructure has been analyzed by considering, on the one hand, the ways that classification and standardization shape knowledge practices. A second aspect then involves the development of infrastructures themselves. So research here examines the work of making, of maintaining, and repairing infrastructures, and the question of which work is made visible or invisible by infrastructures. This perspective addresses work practices by focusing on development, on data work, on human-machine collaboration. A people-centered approach includes then different actors, infrastructural engineers, the designers of ADM systems, the caseworkers who collaborate with the systems, and the people whose data feed the systems and who are actually then targeted in processes of enhancing welfare through automation. Welfare infrastructures have agentive capacities, and quoting Susan Lee Starr, the performativity of infrastructure or the power of infrastructure shows in the way in which it accommodates some practices more than others, some people more than others, and some viewpoints more than others. So with this background, we could have a closer look at the question of power and how it plays out with new techniques of organizing welfare and welfare management. Now, what can TA do? As you've seen, the EU has set a sort of very ambitious agenda for the digitization and for the development of artificial intelligence, but then the concrete implementation, of course, can vary widely across countries. The implementation of welfare infrastructures depends heavily on contextual factors, including historical, cultural, political, and economic differences between countries across Europe. And I think to understand the implications of automating welfare, it then needs empirical research across different welfare regimes in the EU. That means we need to consider differences in welfare state models which have been developing like from the social democratic, the corporatist, the post-austerity, and the post-socialist welfare state models. How is welfare automated across European countries, and how is the automation of the welfare sector intersecting with the transformation of welfare across these different welfare regimes? I think as TA researchers, we can and we need to take a stake in how agency is redistributed between public agencies and software engineers, ADM systems, caseworkers, and citizens. And I want to conclude by suggesting that the concept of welfare infrastructures can actually help us to analytically grasp the entanglement of historically grown structural power relations and their emergent materializations in socio-technical systems. So, hoping to contribute in a positive way to the futures of welfare, I'm very lucky to work with this group of wonderful colleagues here on a comparative analysis of automated welfare provision across Europe. In the coming 3 years, our goal is to assess the implications of ADM in welfare for society, for civic agency, and for human flourishing. Our comparative research design in particular looks at 8 countries, which are Sweden and Denmark for the social democratic welfare state model, Germany and Austria for the corporatist model, Italy and Portugal for post-austerity southern model, and Estonia and Poland for the post-socialist welfare state model. And I guess there is much more to do for the TA community in the future in this field of automating welfare and digitizing the public sector. And I guess, as Payal said, we have to step up and make a difference. So if any of you is interested in these issues and is thinking of doing their own projects in this field, please get in touch. I think it is important that we work on this together and try to have an impact there within the next 10 years that this big project is supposed to happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doris, for this enlightening case. I have a bunch of questions. Shall I start with one? First question is, you clarified that all kinds of, ideas and norms were kind of regenerated, reproduced in this new algorithmic system. But at the same time, this algorithmic system enabled, yes, to clarify and bring it into the open. But that's a democratic process. You showed this organization that started the discussion. How did this discussion start? And my basic question is, are you optimistic? Because now we're going to clarify via these algorithms, what the norms and values are behind the biases already in these these welfare agencies, or are you pessimistic about the future?
Well, I think if we think of these kind of failures as a learning step, then we can be optimistic. Mm-hmm. But it needs a whole lot of civic engagement, of digital rights organizations, of knowledge in the public, of public discourse in order to bring this to light. All the material that the Public Employment Agency of Austria has published was supposed to promote the system. Like in the first place, they said, this is a logistic regression and it looks like this and that, right? Mm-hmm. So that we have these snippets that I showed you of where you could try out the system with your own data. So then there was a cry out in public. Then all of a sudden they said, no, it's not a logistic regression. So there was a whole lot of intransparency purposely built around the system. And it was really hard to get to the documents and to the designers who could actually give you insights into how the thing actually works.
Did you do that as a research team, or were
Yes.
there also journalists involved and NGOs?
Well, the whole process was started in Austria by this NGO Epicenter Works. You have seen a picture of their campaign. So they were sort of very important in bringing this to light. And we then did a project with the Chamber of Labor, who thought that, or who has made digitization one of their core issues for the future. And only with their cooperation we got access to the agency and to their documents. So that was very important to have this backup.
Thank you. There's a question in the room.
Yeah, thank you very much for this wonderful talk. I would like to put this comparison between these different states into the center of my question, because it reminds me on this varieties of capitalism idea, and there are these cultural institutional settings which are important for creating comparative advantages or disadvantages. And therefore, I would like to ask you, with regard to your setting you created here, it's like a laboratory of different, of the creating of different algorithmic infrastructures, and therefore I would like to better understand what are your hypotheses with regard to these cultural institutional settings and their impacts on creating a specific algorithmic infrastructure with regard to different cultural institutional advantages and disadvantages.
Yeah, so I think
Thank you very much.
we will actually start from ethnographic studies in the organizations first. You know, when we wrote the project proposal, it was not like perfectly clear yet what would be the cases then if we get the project. What can we actually look at? Because right now I feel like there is a whole lot of failure going on, and a whole lot of projects are closed down again. But with the EU funding and the collective effort that is supposed to go into this development, there will be more upcoming, but we don't know yet what it is. So we will look at core welfare services, for example, in employment agencies or other social services, but we will also look at the communal level, like what kind of ideas of welfare and human flourishing go into smart city developments for communal areas and communal flourishing, so to speak. So there are no hypotheses to be made in advance, but we will do ethnographic studies and data journeys first to see where that leads us.
Behind you, please.
Thank you very much for your very interesting presentation and the way to present it also. It was in a way skeptical and very, very impressive also when you showed us all the risks related to these systems, but you choose a very promissory project title, Automating Welfare, Algorithmic Infrastructures for Human Flourishing in Europe. Why did you so?
Well, if you ask me about the specific project we have looked at, you know, I strictly reject the idea that profiling people will bring us any good. But I think there are other ways of working with data that can actually support people in working with welfare clients or getting access to welfare if they need it. So even, like I said, if there is a whole lot of failure going on right now, and even if Algorithm Watch has a whole lot to do to keep the cases, to keep an oversight about all the cases, and if we have a lot of trouble to get access to the information of what is actually going wrong, I think there is a potential to move away from the profiling of people to providing information and decision support in a system that can actually help a real modernization of the welfare services.
Okay, thank you. How would that work? Well, we have a question for another question.
Yes, Tom Børsen, Denmark. I work with participatory technology assessment and participatory design, and I have a question to the case study with this system for rating the unemployed. So I was thinking, to which extent were the employees and maybe even the unemployed people included in the development process of this system? It seems that they were not included very much, but I would like to hear how and when they were included.
So there was a selection of caseworkers that were included, and this has really been a process that has gone over 10 years from when the idea first started. Different governments have stopped the project, have started it again, and there have been a lot of meetings and also a lot of effort to make something good, you know. There have not been any unemployed organizations involved, which has been criticized and which clearly shows in the system. I think the general attitude of the public employment service in Austria is a little bit paternalistic. So the idea of, you know, you cannot just sit down with somebody and they are able to tell you what they need, but you have to kind of figure it out by using a system that tells you what they need or what they deserve, shows the attitude that might not end up in inviting them into participatory design projects.
Thank you. There's a question there.
Thank you very much. I think what you have shown here with this nice example of the job-seeking agency who can help, the purpose for such agency would be to provide equality and equity. And you have shown that they are failed to do that both. They cannot reduce inequality, and they cannot also guarantee equity to get a job. My question is, and you suggested that the objectification of a human being for any sort of system like they are doing could be one problem. I mean, we in the university are also objectified based on our H-index and citations, for example. My question to you is that then a future system which could support human flourishing would need then fundamentally change the way we evaluate ourselves or our system. So you need a kind of radical shift in the not only in the public management in all aspects, but I doubt whether in a current society where things are based and determined by capital and money, whether that is ever possible against a human value. So I come from India, and I now see a very good conflict between philosophical things in last 200 years between West and East, as we in India, where in the past we thought that we should not objectify a human, for example, excellence or something. But our government in India and in many other Asian countries completely shifted to such system, and that created another sort of problem. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Well, you know, I guess, I mean, it is really about the coarse classification of people into three groups here, right? I mean, if I don't necessarily think that it is so wrong to say that it needs a segmented offer for different kinds of needs, but to segment people is a different kind of story. We know that also prior to the system, caseworkers differentiated between people, like, you know, more like who deserves what. But it makes a difference to implement a system that then enables policies to support the idea that welfare is not for the weakest in a society anymore, but it is for those who can be helped most effectively. That has not been the principle that social security has been based on.
Other questions? It's a very interesting observation, talking about inequalities and how it's strengthened by the system, actually.
Yeah, but I think this is exactly what was said before. Yeah? So any classification would lead to the same problem. So even you mentioned the academic system, not? It's also meant that those who can exceed such a threshold are those who are prospective and the others not prospective. So if you go this way, so and the digital techniques now allow it at a large scale, so it shows that principle is wrong. That I think it shows.
So what's the question?
That's my comment to that. And the question is exactly that. If it is principally wrong, or this is something we would further, fine, going to the details, providing more variables, if we can avoid this problem.
Well, you know, I think, in fact, there are conflicting goals inscribed to that system, and they are not being quite honest to themselves. If I want to optimize a system for efficiency, I need to take different measures and different comparisons than when I want to optimize a system for fairness and anti-discrimination. They like mix together different goals and think it can all be done in one strike, so to speak. If I want to work against discrimination on the labor market, I might want to have a look at organizations and not about people characteristics and individualized ideas of how discrimination or group discrimination might affect an individual.
Thank you.
Yes, yeah. I would also support your observations on the profiling procedure, and it reminds me in some way to the case of triage. So it's some sort of triage, and as everybody knows, triage is not made for everyday practice. So it's only selective for very catastrophic events where no other solution is possible. So in this way, I would strongly support your critics on this profiling procedure.
And do you have a question?
No, it's again a comment.
Thank you.
There's a question.
Thank you, Doris, for this inspiring talk. I would like to ask, would you say that the practice is actually much better than the model? Is it a problem of modeling?
Do you mean the practice prior to the
Present
introduction?
practice.
Well, I mean, it has its flaws, of course, right? So arbitrariness or discrimination have been the case and have been criticized, but I think there are other measures to work against those flaws in practice. And I think that currently the employment agency has very good guidelines how to foster particular groups and how to not discriminate protected groups. I think it's also a question of training caseworkers. And the question is, how will training change if you don't talk about the big questions anymore and the policy guidelines behind them, but if you train them to use the system instead? Currently, lots of caseworkers come from social professions. So many of them are social workers who really want to help people too. So an introduction of a system like that might change like the generation of people that will work there. And I'm not talking in terms of age here, but in terms of aspirations and education.
Are there any more questions? My wife just entered the room, so let's... No, are there any questions in the room? Then I got a final question. If this is kind of, kind of symbolizes or shows what the state of affairs with e-governance or AI government is in Europe, that's one question. Is that the case? And then the second question is, how can we improve this system? And I thought about one thing. If you look at developments that have a very important impact on the environment, the local environment, then we have the Aarhus Convention, which says the public has to be informed, the public has to be, they should know what is happening, and they should be able to participate. Should we have a similar thing about these developments that have a very important impact on our social environment? So first question, is this emblematic for AI government?
Not for e-government in general,
okay.
But if we talk AI government, I would say yes. And I think it is not a coincidence that they are trying out these practices with the most vulnerable groups, and we can see that in all the countries. So, I mean, why concentrate on welfare fraud and not concentrate on tax evasion, for example? Yeah. Now your second question.
Second question, how to improve it. And this analog with the Aarhus Convention, which says that people have to be informed and should participate.
So, I mean, this is actually something that the European path to the digital 2030 decade, I don't remember the exact wording now, includes that participation and an awareness in public when those systems are used on your data or in specific affect you in specific life circumstances, that you as a citizen have to know about it and that you have a right to have an insight into what's going on. But this is not common practice now.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for your inspiring talk, Doris. I think you delivered on your promise.
Thank you.
Big hand.